Alright, we sound good for now. Hello, Pixie Lord underscore Armada. Or as I always call you in my head when I read your chats on Discord, hey Pixie. Good to have you. Thanks for coming out. Hopefully, I can make this worth yours and everyone's time. That's what most people default to. Awesome. Alright. So, welcome everyone. Uh, we'll start with introductions to give everyone kind of a moment to show up. I literally just posted that we're starting now chats, but uh, it's kind of a weird time of the day for a lot of people, so it's one of the only times that works for me, so it's why I haven't adjusted it. But I do hope to in the future to kind of hit that sweet spot where people can join. But for now, this is when I can stream, so this is when I will be streaming. I just enjoy it. Hello, everyone. My name is Captain Nathaniel Wilhelm. Most people just call me Captain. Today will be our part 5 on creative writing, and we'll be covering formatting, pacing, and editing. As always, this is kind of a beginner course. This is going to be a lot of the basics. I know there are going to be a lot of exceptions to the rules, but hopefully for lots of people, this will give you some kind of starting point. So, according to Pixie, in Britain it's 5 p.m., so it's perfect for people in Britain. So that's probably why whenever I stream at this time of the day, I always get so many viewers from Europe. um, but yeah. So if there's any problems with the mic or any problems with the audio or the stream, let me know. We can always restart or get something fixed or going. This will be a very lecture format, but if you do have questions, please feel free to ask. But there will be a section at the end where I will open up to everyone. So if people have questions about the material or questions about their own stories, questions about feedback specifically, we'll do most of our feedback section then. So, we will get right into it. So, what we're going to cover today, as always, who I am and why you should care, a recap on what we covered last time, and then for our segments today, our big ones I want to focus on are knowing your audience, formatting, pacing, prologues versus first chapter, and editing. So, who I am and why you should care. My name is Captain Nathaniel Wilhelm, and you should care, if anything, because I stole your attention. But other than that, I am right now a writer turned streamer. I've been writing for a very long time. I have 5 canon works that are either finished or in progress, or mostly finished. Those canon works add up to at least 1,000,000 words, and those are published material, and that does not include anything of all the other stories I've not finished, all of the background material for those works, anything I ever did for school, etc. That is just those 5 canon works, so I have at least 1,000,000 words of published material you should care about. And as I said before, I have been writing for a long time, so I'm sure I've gotten my 10,000 hours in by now. If anything, if you disregard all of that, if anything, I have my experiences to bring to the table as a writer with ADHD, so there'll be a lot of hot tips and perspective changes about that you may see different here than different with other people who talk about writing. So, uh, awesome. Please, Pixie, it's awesome if you take notes. I know last time Spear actually posted them in the Discord. For all of those you want to join the Discord, I have links on my Patreon page. For links to my works and my Twitter and my Patreon, those are going to be in my my Twitch profile. So, recap on last time. Where to start writing, and where to start essentially creating your world. We did a world building class last time. Gods, kind of basic god organizations there are: monotheism, polytheism, or as I like to, or in the council, or as I like to call them, the Christian God, the family drama, and the council. Religions essentially were just ways to keep in mind how the gods would affect the world, help them be introduced to the world, introduced to your story and your characters. Magic and tech, we covered some basics on how to think about hard magic versus soft magic. I also recommend listening to Brandon uh, Sanderson's lecture on that. But essentially, like some basic tropes for magic and some basic eras in technical advancements on technology. Where to find middle grounds, and then gimmicks. Gimmicks are your own things on how to. For middle grounds, it was basically just go out and try, and you won't and get. It's a lot of trial and error to find out what middle ground works for you and your works. For gimmicks, gimmicks is what you bring to the story, and to lean into those. Don't play soft with your gimmicks. Like just like how Goblin Slayer, their gimmick was how all he did was slay goblins, and it's one of the more successful anime franchises out there. It's very iconic. It's very notable. Even if you haven't seen it, most people who are savvy with anime know about it. So we talked about other things but if you have any more questions about that, just go back and watch it. Just a healthy reminder, writing is a skill. Writing you will develop just as you develop your muscles. The more you write, the better you'll get, and the more you practice different techniques, the better you'll get at those different techniques, and you'll get chances to trial and error and figure out your own style of writing as you learn these basics that I'm going to teach you. Once again, in this class especially, these are terms and things that help me, and so this is by far not the end all be all of formatting, pacing, editing, etc. This is going to be the basics that I think are going to be really good for new writers getting into things, maybe some terminology you haven't heard of before, and just some ideas that hopefully will help you um, get a better grasp on these concepts. As always, the internet's a great tool. You can look up a lot of just different resources on it that are, I just want to share mine. This will be my perspective and my adding to the pool that you can find online all these resources to help you be a better writer. If you get anything from me, I hope it is that I believe in you and that I think you can do it, and these are the tools that hopefully help you be awesome and be a better writer. So, first of all, what I want to cover is knowing your audience. Knowing your audience is going to do a lot for your stories. We've talked a lot about writing for you, but to some dynamic, you really have to pick and know your audience when you decide to share your works. And whether you pick your audience as it from the get-go or figure it out as you're writing, you really want to know your audience. More than anything, realize that writing for you and writing to share are two generally different things. You can write for you and then post it to share it, but your writing is gonna be most effective when you get it to your audience. A lot of the disconnect between especially Hollywood and the modern audience is that they've lost this know your audience feel. They have these concepts and fanboys and IPs, and instead of leaning into their their characters and the drama, they take them and want to do their own thing with them and then blame the fans when they're not respecting the source material and when they're not respecting the fans. No, you have an audience, respect your fans, play to your fans, lean into your gimmicks, but more importantly, like think about the age group you're writing to. That's going to be your basis to start with. Who your fan group who your readers are going to be is going to be heavily tied to your main character. How old is your main character? Is your main character a boy or a girl? What's their setting, etc.? That is going to be a big, heavy place to start. And then also where you post, self-publish, blog, send manuscripts, and all that stuff will dictate a lot. If you're writing for a book, a novel to go in like a paperback book, your audience is going to be vastly different than if you're like me, who writes in a web novel formats that look really good on cell phones and things, handheld devices. Also, if you're like a journalist or have a blog or something, how you write is going to completely differ. You're going to have from those people as well. I am very much more a fantasy creative writer. I definitely heavily focus on teens and teen novels, but I also do address some older audiences. If you look at Tales of the Pearly City, that one is for kind of a teen novel audience, but also kind of an older crowd just because of how old Cal is and all his interactions. But Fox Tales and Fairy Tales is definitely a teen novel. Sebas pre everything going down before he dies is 17, and then as he lives, he may be growing throughout the story, but he still kind of has that 17-year-old brain that uh, resonates with that era of audience. Also with lots more, but you kind of get the idea. It'll resonate with the audience you're going for, but at the same time, that's not a hard and fast rule. Um, there are stories to enjoy about Gandalf and nobody's hundreds of years old, or different elves and nobody's hundreds of years old, etc. And that's where you have to keep in mind different aspects of relatability and character development, stuff like that. But like I said, the age group of your main character is going to be a starting ground, not a hard and fast answer. And if you post a novel on a article website, you're going to have vastly different success than if you post a novel on, say, Wattpad. I counts if I feel like I am 1,000 years old. Yeah, sometimes. But that's where relatability definitely comes in. Those little quirks and flaws that we all kind of have. That like fear, cowardice, loss, PTSD, those kind of things do resonate and aren't age bound or gender restricted. But if you're writing about a woman who's talking about her periods and you get really into like feminist culture and women power, then you're really going, you know, your audience. If you try to sell that kind of work to a male audience, you're also not going to find a lot of success. Um, Unless you write it towards males in a way they like whatever, but it's probably not going to have nearly as much success as if you write about a dude who's scared to talk to girls and that kind of thing. So, um, getting into formatting, I have 5 basic formatting types that I want to go over today. Obviously, there are a whole lot more, and I have plenty of examples of do's and don'ts. But the 5 main formatting types that I'm familiar with that I want to talk about are going to be novel format, web novel format. I call it periodical, but it kind of covers a large area of writing topics, poetry and prose, and then finally textbook. So, how are we going to talk about formatting? Well, mostly I want to get into paragraphs and paragraph blocking or paragraphing. Um, One of the biggest sins in my book, in all writing, is single paragraph chapters. Or when I see dialogue in the paragraph for more than one character, like sometimes it works, but if it's every chapter and it's just nonsensical. It'll also scare off a lot of readers. So that's kind of why I want to talk to this. Like, how do I write and get this all set up so that I'm not writing one paragraph chapters? So I figure that there's just a certain group of new writers that just have to be told it because they haven't figured it out yet, and they have to be given tips to kind of really nail home, well, how do I fix it? Well, your biggest hack and tip to creating, to writing and formatting and getting it down is paragraphs, where your paragraph breaks are. First of all, each paragraph should be one thought or topic, and then you break if it's start talking about another aspect of what's going on, another city, another weapon type, another type of magic, another area of expertise, or just another thought altogether. Does Madison like me versus does Catherine like me, or vice versa? Those would be 2 different paragraphs. especially if you have lots and lots of material go into them. Also, dialogue should always start a paragraph. Or at least you should try to. Um, a, Segments of dialogue should always be their own kind of paragraph. If you have three different people talking in one paragraph, that is a mistake. If you have, it should be uh, blank blank blank. He said, paragraph. Blank blank blank. She said, paragraph. Blank blank blank. He said, paragraph. And then you should really work it into that. But then you can start kind of messing with the rules and go blank blank blank. He said, and then and she responded by saying blank 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 after she did it, and you can start kind of experimenting like that. But every different segment of that conversation, every time they switch between speakers, you should switch paragraphs to break it up to show that a whole new person is talking. And then, once you kind of get an idea of some of those general rules, you can start experimenting with negative space. You can have a whole paragraph that's one topic, but if you want to emphasize one thing in the middle of that paragraph, one sentence or something like that, you can actually paragraph break so that only that one sentence is stated, and then paragraph break again and finish off the paragraph. Negative space really helps draw the eye. It really helps set a sense of importance. It also helps set a pace for the reader to read in. Just like how people will change how they read based on commas and periods, you can change the pace at which they read with how many paragraphs you put or how many paragraph spaces and stuff like that. If you go on back and read Tales of the Pearly City, you see a lot of experimentation with negative space and paragraph experiments, especially in like the epilogues. You'll see a lot of negative space and uses of paragraphs in those. So as I talked about, what not to do. This is just horrifying to me as a reader. It might serve to explain what negative space is for the back of the class. Okay, we will definitely get into that. We'll talk about that right now then. So as you can see here, this is a block of text. This is just a scary thing for a lot of readers, especially people who are just trying to start out reading or want to read a couple of things. New readers especially will scare at blocks of texts. So this is just what not to do. Please, for the love of God, if you have multiple people talking in the same paragraph, break it up and show them talking in different paragraphs. And like this. So, this is the exact same text as the last chapter, as the last slide. The exact same text. If you see, a raven landed in front of Gideon. A raven landed in front of Gideon. But now, this one looks a lot less scary to read. Now, if you look at that space at the very top, above and below rest, that space where there's nothing, that is negative space. You can play with negative space in a lot of ways. By adding more negative space or having less negative space will determine how you see things. And for those of you who really don't understand what negative space is, think about when you are drawing a picture on a white piece of paper, anything that you leave white, that color of the paper, is safe to say is negative space. The space, if you draw two characters on a piece of paper, the space between them where there's nothing is that negative space. It's just that space where there isn't anything. Positive space is where there are things to see. So, this is novel format. In novel format, I wrote King of the Vale, Commander of Legions. This was a very early book while I was still writing novel format. This is stuff you'll see in your paperbacks. If you go to a library or any section where you pick up a book and flip to a page, this is that format, a novel format. You'll see great big, segments where there's just paragraphs of just descriptions on things. If you look at Lord of the Rings or if you look at Stephen King, you'll see a lot of big paragraphs in those books. And then where there's dialogue, of course, there'll be some smaller paragraphs, but that's kind of just a rule with dialogue. So, but you'll have generally more words per page. Um, you'll have dialogue with a lot more descriptors instead of just he said, she said. Just like at the top, you see rest. Gideon looked at Zeke, and then it's safe. You ladies need to sleep. Don't worry about anything. I'll take first watch. After he stood up, Zeke started walking around on patrol, even though he knew they were safe. Like, you just have a little bit more to that. Um, yeah, that's going to be novel format. If you're writing to send it to an editor, this is generally the type of very, very basic, very traditional formatting you will get. There's nothing wrong with it. Very many web novels are still written this format. It's okay. But web novel format will be a little bit different because the space that you're working with will be different. Oftentimes, people writing for web novel are writing something that will be viewed on a phone in a major percent of their audience. So, in order to make it look prettier or easier to digest, it'll be a little bit slimmer. There'll be more breaks in paragraphs, more dialogue usually, and it'll be made to be read on phone screens. In fact, sometimes paragraphs of descriptions will be read as dialogue between like the author or the main character and himself. And you'll have breaks in those paragraphs judging on what he's saying to himself and what's happening around him. This is an excerpt from True Love Seventh Kiss Dungeon Break. That's the second one in the series. There'll be more dialogue, and that's just more my style. But it's kind of the web novel format that I work in is based on a mixture of traditional novels and light novels, and it's to a format that I consider and call the web novel format. Light novels, if you've ever read any translations on light novels, you'll see lots and lots of paragraph breaks, and then also lots of points where they talk, where there's no he said, she said. You just kind of have to assume or know who's speaking based on context clues in the paragraphs before and after that. So I've kind of mixed those two together. I've had lots of paragraph breaks, and then I make shorter he said, she said descriptions just to kind of keep the flow going without confusing the reader on who's talking. So it's my healthy medium between the two. Um, Periodicals, blogs, this will cover a whole range more of just kind of other ways to write, but essentially it is a writer to reader format. It addresses the audience on a topic or audience or topic in some way. This is an excerpt from my work called Captain's Trove, where I gave a few things to the readers as I was going along when I had more time to work on writing. This was just a foreword, but it very much fits the purpose of like a letter format or a blog or news articles, since it's talking to the reader. When you talk to the reader, you won't have talking quotes and he said, she said, because uh, it's a letter from the writer to the reader, and they're either trying to convince you of something, or it's heavy on exposition, or they're trying to explain something, or they're trying to sell you on something, or convince you of something, or they're just trying to address you in some general manner, saying, I love you. The stars and sky would fall the day that you drew your last breath, or some kind of thing like that. So, I don't have a super lot of experience with this outside of author's notes and writing reports and things like that, but it is a segment of writing. These are where you'll see a lot of your basic rules on structure, like what paragraphs are uh, broken up between topics and ideas. Just going over this, as you can see, the first sentence, ahoy, just introduction. The second paragraph is, this is me, I'm Nathaniel Wilhelm, the captain of this crew and beloved Misfits. and then paragraph break after um, introduce myself. This is my trove. Well, you'll have access to it. Now it's small, but we're going to fill it up. Da da da. Next paragraph break, and then I'll be placing art. So all the things I'll be included in here, things I'll put in here. Paragraph break. Many of you have come from Foxtales and Fairy Tales. This is a way to kind of include the people and different people who have come here. And so himself insert some other works if you haven't read them, of course. Some shameless plugs. Paragraph break. And I just want to say, No Captain has a better crew than you guys, and if you aren't a member, just go hit that follow button. Uh, there's plenty of room to go around, so a different thought altogether. As you can see, each one of these paragraphs has a different concept that they're talking about, a different thought, a different topic, and they're broken so that they're easy to read and easy to digest from the reader. Poetry and prose. So now that you're getting kind of the basics on what paragraph breaking and negative spacing is, in poetry and prose, that's supposed to be prose, you will have a lot more wiggle room on how you play around with paragraphing, blocking out, and negative spaces and all that stuff. So spaces, blocks of text, or play with spacing. Usually, if you're writing poetry, usually it'll be self-contained, but you'll also see some changes in fonts and sizes. And with shorter works, that's usually more acceptable than if you're playing too much with fonts and sizes inside something like a novel. Usually, the most different you want to get in a novel is maybe two different or three different kinds of fonts if you're expressing like letters inside the novel, or different dialects, and then maybe like bold and italics and those basic tools. But you really don't want to extend farther than that. You don't want to have a novel that's in five different fonts unless it's specifically unless it's for a purpose, in which case you should sell that purpose and really make that your gimmick. But this is a poem that I wrote in Thoughts and Cogs from the Mind of an Optimistic Pessimist. This was just kind of a throwaway work on my Wattpad of just like random thoughts and random ideas and poems I wrote. This was just like a random love note I wrote. I didn't write this to anybody, though I should have. This was just when I was feeling an overwhelming amount of love and just wanted to write a love poem. But sadly, it wasn't to anyone. Otherwise, I would have remembered. I remember the ones that were about people. It's very generic. Uh, if you want to use it, it's very good. Or if you want to keep it, it's very fun. There's a lot of the gimmick in this poem is that there's a lot of it starts off with now I can't, and then I love you, wanted to write you a love note, and then I remembered all the love songs in the world, and I wanted to burn you a mixtape with every love song, and I thought about all the voices, and I wanted them all to sing to you, and then I thought about all their ears, and I wanted to shout to the world how I feel about you. Then I remembered you, and I remembered I only had one thing to say, and I only wanted to say it to you. I love you, and now I can't. And it's very kind of almost a melancholy piece when you include everything going on there with the title, and that was kind of the gimmick. Burn a mixtape. Now that is aging yourself. Yeah. For those of you who don't know what a mixtape is, and that was also from an era way before me, that would be like creating a playlist to someone. So, on Spotify. Prose. Prose is a different type of poetry, and more often than not, it's more open to just randomly having either a single paragraph thought or having just blocks of paragraphs in different ways. But essentially, like in its base, prose can be anything if you go and take a poetry class and learn about prose. Uh, but it can be just like a certain sentence. Like this. This is Everland, and this is just an old poem written in prose. There's no rhyming in it. It's just kind of a nifty thought, but written in a prose poetry format. It was the genesis for another work I made in on my Wattpad. It was a very short book, but it was very Very weird, very random, but it was very. I wrote based on a dream I had, and it got just weird and, and needy from there. Textbook formats. Textbook format. Most people that have gone to school understand what a textbook format looks like. It is blocks of information. It is basically exposition in all of the most efficient and dry ways, and it's just the facts. Like it's just there to give you the facts. There's nothing it wants to sell you on. I mean, depending on who you talk to, you could argue that all textbooks are trying to sell us on something to brainwash us, but that is a can of worms for another conversation. But basic textbook formatting is going to be blocks of text, blocks of exposition, and honestly, a lot of your lore notes for yourself will be in this format because it'll just be blocks of ideas and lore and how magic works and how islands are and imports and exports and who does this and who is why and kings and queens and gods and um that's why I included an expert excerpt from Fox Tales and Fairy Tales cast and crew. This is about the Quints, who are Sebus's uh, essentially they're his cousins, but also kind of his siblings, depending on who you talk to. But it's just facts given in a way. It's just textbook. It's not gonna be a story. It's not gonna be entertaining unless you like reading about facts. All right. Wow, we've only no, we still have lots to go over. This is just pacing. We've covered one of the three. uh, we've gone for 30 minutes. I'm gonna take a drink real quick because I've talked so much already. Hopefully, the sound of me drinking does not disgust everyone and their ASMR sensors. Pacing. Pacing is something that is kind of difficult for me to teach because there is a whole lot and a whole little that goes into it, depending on who you talk to, and it can be very technical. So I wanted to approach this as someone who was addressing new writers who have no idea what they're getting into or what they're doing. So this is my approach to new writers about pacing. So the idea of pacing, as given by dictionary.com, is the act or result of setting a pace or setting the rate of movement or progress as of a story, movie, lesson, etc. So, I came up with three easy to consider concepts when you're thinking about pacing. And these will have pros and cons as to how far on the scale you go on them. But the first concept you really have to consider with pacing is genre, and then the length of the story you're going to write, and then the stakes in that story. So as you can see, it kind of zooms in. So, genre. Genre will determine the events and beats you'll need to progress the story and how frequently they need to be included. And beats is just kind of some mini recap of things that we've covered in other lessons. Beats are mini story arcs, and a story arc is exposition, rising action, climax, falling action, and resolution. So if you were looking at this at a piece of paper, exposition would be point 0, rising action would be point like 3, climax would be a 5 on the scale, falling action would be a 4, and then resolution would be a 3. So it kind of, or a 0, depending on how you write it. So you would just see an arc going up and then down. And then mini story arcs would be like tiny little ups and downs, following a bigger overall story arc. And most of the time, the rising action in your story from start to finish will be the longest section because it'll have little story arcs in it. But that is a conversation for the story arc segment we talked about before, and for your own personal further research. So some basic ideas of why genre are going to matter. These are just some ideas that are some genres that I have that I just wanted to go over real quick. So, slice of life, in slice of life, your events or mini story arcs will be moments of everyday life. For lots of people in slice of life, isekai or Japanese mana, this will be segments where they're cooking or segments where they're um, dating or segments where they're talking about work and then come down from work where they got to drink with friends or stuff like that. Um, or where they meet a new female protagonist because they're all isekai are full of just harems of women. Action. In an action genre, it'll be adrenaline-inducing defiance of death. If you look at just John Wick, the events you'll see at each fight scene is an event, but each fight scene there's like a little pacing mini story between them where there's kind of a slowdown and then you find out some new information and then he goes to the next fight scene. Die Hard's another good example of that. Mystery. For mystery novels, technically the Sherlock Holmes novels aren't categorized as very good mystery novels because they don't really tease the reader and give them enough clues to figure out who the villain is. It just kind of Sherlock Holmes shows up and says, haha, that guy is the villain. But usually they're entertaining enough that people don't care about that. But in most mystery novels, the writers will leave clues for the reader to figure out who the villain is. And as you read, you people like myself will go back and reread segments to try to figure out clues and who's going on and what's going on to kind of sorry to figure out who's the bad guy and why they done it. Romance novels. Big thing that's going to set your pacing is interactions between the main love interests. Now, if you have multiple love interests, this will also be included, but mostly it'll be that main two, who's the main female lead and who's the main male lead, and them getting together in the end, and all of everything that counts in the middle is just a mini story arc. Now, as always, none of these are like just cut and dry on their own. There'll be romance and action and mystery mixed up in all sorts of storylines, and it's just your dis, di, it'll be your choice as the author what to include and how to do it. So mix and match variety. But those are some ideas of the events that you'll have that'll be important in those genres. Um, so for those events, uh, length. So the length of your story. For longer stories, you can probably get away with longer gaps between events and longer events and just kind of really take your time and really dwell on what's going on and really give your like descriptions of the cities and things. And if you're just going for a long novel, this is the trap that I fall into. You really just kind of get comfortable writing as much as you want. But for shorter stories, like quote unquote short stories, like the stories you see in foxtails and fairy tales, you'll need to prioritize getting to the point rather than dwelling on the fluff, rather than what the age is and what the concepts are. You really focus and hone in on like 1 to 2 main concepts in those stories, and then just kind of bring them home. And so, the length of your novel, the length of your story, the length of whatever you're doing is really going to determine how many events are in your story and how much wiggle room between these events you have to set up the next event. Some pros and cons. So for longer stories, you are going to get lots of fluff and exposition, lots of time to really expound on things, but you can get more of a drop off when it gets repetitive or there are really, really long gaps between major events. Uh, I want to say that uh, Amazon's Lord of the Rings television series was just kind of a big sufferer of this, but and and just didn't sell it, but they have other problems with that series. Things like Game of Thrones, there was a lot of exposition in Games of Thrones, but there was a lot also happening. There's a lot of drama, there's a lot of political intrigue, but there's also like a lot of events. There were a lot of fight scenes, there were a lot of like things like the Red Wedding that came out of nowhere. For short stories or shorter stories, uh, you will have minimal fluff and exposition, but you'll get to your point faster. But if you cut it too short, the pros or the cons of that of you may leave just yourself and the reader unsatisfied with how little content there is. There are some super cool short stories that ends up being made into movies because they were super awesome and needed more content, like Real Steel. But there are some short stories that just don't leave the reader satisfied because they don't feel finished. Um, Stakes. Stakes are what is on the line. Uh, this will be if you're writing a teen romance, it'll be how much the guy likes the girl versus how much he likes the girl. If it's an action, it'll be what's on the line. Is it just the main character's life on the line, or is it the kingdom that he cares about, or his family back home, or if everyone is dead, like is it just his life? Um, Here's the thing though, raising the stakes and tension is going to make the readers want to read. You are raising the stakes between every major event by setting up that event. You really want to raise those stakes, get the reader who wants to see the conclusion to that event. But if you raise them too much and then don't ever sell that event, or don't sell it right, or just don't get to it, you can leave the readers with a form of fatigue where everything is just tense but nothing is happening. Um, so what you want to do to alleviate that is have little mini stakes or little mini arcs of things that resolve. Like you have side characters who have little resolutions in their mini arcs and stuff like that. When you have a story with just lower stakes, you do get to take your time, but if you don't raise them at all, or if you don't raise them enough, you do fall into the trap of it might get boring to the readers. If you have higher stakes, you do kind of get to jump into the action more. There is more at stake, there is more craziness, there's more action and excitement. But if you have too much, and it just goes on and on and on, there's a danger of fatigue. There's actual adrenaline that will build up in the reader, and if that adrenaline is not satisfied or goes on too long, they will actually get tired reading your story. So, you should have some balance of low stakes that are met and some high stakes that are there to keep your reader uh, interested. And this is just that slide. I just didn't erase that. Erase that. But yeah. So that is what is really going to set off your pacing. So the genre is going to determine what events happen. Your length is going to be how many events and when you need to get to them. And your stakes are going to be how exciting it is and how important those events are in the story. And so, as a general rule for pacing, you want to have beats in a story that kind of look like a heartbeat. So you want to kind of go ba bump 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 ba bump, and just have like a big climax at the end. But you really do want to write your story with lots of ups and downs, and either satisfactory moments that ease the reader into like catharsis, or some, and then mix in some higher stakes, or show the stakes, like show a character dying to raise the stakes, or show a character having a bad moment to kind of raise those stakes, or show them losing their job, or how much money means to this character to show why they're following through with their motivation. So that is going to be my general rules to think about for pacing. You do want to have with pacing, you just want to consider that you have events and you want to build up those events, and the amount of events you have in the story are going to be determined by the length of your overall story. Prologue versus first chapter. I talked about some of this in my Discord, but I figured that this was something that could really kind of hit home about for people getting started, especially when it comes to pacing and editing. Um, do you need a prologue in every story you tell? The answer is no. You don't need a prologue. In fact, many of my side works that I end up writing don't have one. I end up either writing one later or just end up never having, never finishing. But we're not talking about that. Um, but what a prologue should be is a short glimpse at the story and your style, unique to the reader's experience. And the first chapter should flow easily into the next chapter with a natural feeling of progression. So if your first chapter and second chapter have a big break in gap in time or something in them, or some break in emotion or gap in something, you may want to consider turning your first chapter into a prologue. Or if your prologue leads into the first chapter really easily and just kind of goes on next to each other, you may want to consider changing your first chapter or your prologue into a first chapter instead. Some short things that your prologues should include. Your prologue should include an important character, a glimpse into the story's setting, some foreshadowing information to set tension, establish the genre in some way, and have an introduction to your writing style. We do talk a lot about writing style, and I'll get more into that at the end, but at a certain point, your writing style is the efforts of your your trial and error as a writer. So, some common things you'll see about prologue tropes. Uh, some common prologue tropes will be men of the future, and it's better for worse. You've seen this in Tales of the Pearly City, and then the first chapter is a total break from the prologue. The scene of the crime, you will have a dead body, and you'll have some of the main characters around talking about why it's bad that the body is that person, or why it's in this place, or why it's arranged that way. The moment that changed everything, sometimes that's a breakup, sometimes that's a war, sometimes that's uh, somebody's death. A moment before an event, before an event, uh, that'd be like the moment before setting off on a new adventure, or the moment before a war, or the moment before a dance, and then going back in time to the first chapter. Outside perspectives explaining a conflict. This would be kind of like the Mass Effect intro, where you get to pick your choices, but the narration is all about who this person you've created is, talking about how cool you are and building you up. The death or near death of the main character, them lying in their pool of blood, or right before the horror monster gets them and reflecting on their choices. And then sometimes it's like a prophecy. It's something that an oracle tells, and like they bleed from all their eyes and noses, and it's super dramatic, and the main character will come, or the great darkness will come, and blah blah blah. And then we talk about the main character in the next chapter. So these are going to be some of your common prologue tropes that you will see in your writing or as you're reading. Now, your first chapter will be your first story. Uh, it'll be the first part where you get into your story. It'll be your first step into your story. So, your main chapter should include your main character, or at least a main character. Please, for the love of God, don't have an exposition main chapter where it just talks about the world and lands and gods, and then the next chapter talks about the political things and stuff like that. No. First chapter should have your main character. You shouldn't have a crap ton of expose and no character interaction. Some people can get away with it. New writers should not do this. Glimpses into the genre. The reason why I say glimpses is because not every first chapter starts out as, say, a mystery. Sometimes mysteries build up, and then in chapter 5 or 6, we discover the dead body. And then the first chapter is just kind of introducing characters, getting to the location, and it being a bit suspicious. Um, or if it's going to be like a war genre, some first main chapters aren't going to be like just the guy in the battlefield from start to finish in the book. Usually they're in a village somewhere or something, and then something happens and they go to war. A hook. The hook is going to be your first sentence. The hook is going to be something that is going to something unique to you that is going to sell the reader make them turn the page, to help them read the rest of the first chapter, to read the page. Marley was as dead as a doornail was a great hook from Charles Dickens, and that it's in every one of his plays. It's like, who is Marley? Why is he dead? What is this doornail analogy? And then the author talks about what dead as a doornail is, and da 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 da. But Marley is as dead as a doornail, or it was a dark and stormy night. Some of these are overused because they feel so good and are so classic, but some of them are there. As a first time writer, I wouldn't advise getting super obsessed with the hook, uh, but just think of it as something to say to Christmas Carol. Yeah, Charles Dickens' Christmas Carol. It's something to say to hook the reader's attention. It's just to grab their attention. You just do that. You want to do that with the first sentence to get their attention, but you can do it with the first page, the first paragraph. But you want to catch their attention before the first chapter ends, essentially. Um, the fourth thing you want to include is a soft intro into the setting of the story. And I say soft because you should introduce the setting of the story, but you shouldn't introduce everything about the setting of the story. We don't need to know every god and every continent and every main character in the first chapter. Focus on zooming in the first chapter to the main character and their wants and needs, and then as the story progresses, zoom out and trickle in setting and stuff like that. And that's why step 5 is keep it simple, stupid. As in, keep it simple, you stupid person. Other people think Kiss is keep it simple and stupid. No, keep it simple, you stupid person. Like, just do it. You don't need to include everything in a first chapter. You don't need the laws and rules of the galaxy and everything going on. And these are going to be what you want to focus on, especially as a new writer. As I said, trial and error develops your unique style, and you'll get to play around with these rules a little bit. But playing around with these rules, you have to know and follow the rules first. Just like you have to know how to speak a language before you know how to speak this language of slang and their swear words and all that stuff. Like, you really have to understand before you can utilize it effectively. So, things the first chapters should avoid that I either I see all the time, or just I know that they should not be there, or things that I've done myself. As we've talked about before, info dumps. Don't include all the little cool facts, fun facts about your world in your first chapter. It's okay to do this, to do an info dump, if you're just getting started and you need to put pen to paper. But when you go to share it, you really need to go back and judge how much of that needs to be in there and how much of that you can talk about later. This is one of my biggest regrets while writing Tales of the Pearly City, is just like the first couple, like the prologue and the first couple of chapters. There's some action, but there's just so many info dumping about what's going on. And when I go back and edit it for like real, and I've already tried and started, it's just so much to digest and rewrite other places. You just have to get out of the way really early on before you start posting it and making a big mess of yourself. Keep track of everything that you put in the info dump so you can share it in later. But for the most part, just don't tell Don't show your whole hand, because it can get messy when you're trying to do other hands. Introducing too many characters. In your first chapter, you should really focus on like the main character and maybe their family if they have them. You shouldn't include your 13, 14, 15 person man team and all their friends and all their descriptions and da 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 da. Avoid huge paragraphs of rambling. Uh, you should really get to the point in your first chapter. Your first chapter is what people are going to read and see. Once again, on these rules, you should write your first chapter and just get it written and come back and edit it later. So get it out of the way, and then definitely come back and edit it later if it has any of these. Too many overly vague teasers. You'll see this is a common trope in new writers. There will be like vague teasers as to what the story, and the writer feels so cool because they feel like they're hiding information from the reader. But if you do it too much, you're hiding the entire story from the reader. Don't do that. Tell them the story. Your main character doesn't have to know the whole story, but the reader should know some of the story. Being far shorter or far longer than following chapters. This is just a consistency issue. Your first chapter shouldn't be like 10 pages long, and then the subsequent chapters be like 1.5 to 1 paragraph long. Like, you should show some consistency. The first and second chapter should be in very similar lengths, and at the very least, by chapter 10, you should have set some kind of threshold. My rule of thumb is every chapter should be between 15. It should hit as close to 1,500 words as possible, and shouldn't go too far above 2,000 words. If your chapter is over, like the hard stop point is like 23,000 words for me, and then if anything below 1,300 words, I'll add and pad more to it. But you want to get as close to 1,500 words per chapter, especially if you're writing in a web novel format like Wattpad. A longer author's note than the chapter. You don't want so much in your author's note that your reader doesn't feel like they're reading a book. Keep your author's notes in your chapters, especially your first couple chapters, at the really, really short at the top or at the bottom. And like at the same time, keep them really minimal. You can do longer author's notes later, but for the first couple of chapters, don't make the author's note on a bigger novel hyping up the chapter than the chapter actually is. And then following too many tropes without revealing your gimmick to the story setting. So and so A was bullied and in high school, and he had a girl he liked, and the bully liked the girl that he liked, and that's why he got bullied. And then chapter 2, and it's like, okay. But that's so many beginning chapters to like new reader stuff. Like, you really have to show your gimmick, and your gimmick isn't that he's bullied. Everybody's done that. Does he or she like someone? Everybody's done that. What's the gimmick here? Is it, do they not have a left arm? Are they half blind? Are their parents dead? No, that's too common. Do they have some special secret skill that nobody has, or some super embarrassing event that happened to only them? Like, reveal or tease at least a little bit of your gimmick in the story in the first chapter, because otherwise it'll feel way too generic. Rough drafts versus editing. So this is just a preface to editing, but getting into it. When you are writing your story, especially new writers, do not focus your energy on writing a perfect story right out of the gate. Focus your energy on finishing your rough draft, of getting all your ideas down on the paper at least once. Just get them down. Because your first draft is rarely going to be your final draft. Editing can come later, and it honestly can take easily 2 to 5 times longer than writing it. But don't be scary if it does. But editing is where you get to fix all your mistakes, or you get to go back and read the first chapter and be like, oh no, that's an info dump. I need to get rid of that. Or, oh no, I have all these characters that happened and I forgot that these characters even existed. Or, oh no, this was his name in the first chapter. That's not the name I've been using for the rest of the story. um, you also can go back and rework events, but for your rough draft, very, very don't put so much stress and pressure on yourself to get it perfect. Just get it written. That's my advice. This one, louder and again for the ones in the back, please. It is one of the truest statements. Yeah. Focus your energy on writing it. Just getting it written is a victory of in itself. You can make it perfect later. Like, so this is one of my biggest problems with like posting as you write, because there's a lot of people that will write 2 or 3 chapters and then either lose interest or it'll just be bad. Or they just are they're really expecting like all of their internet to come out and tell them how great of a writer is, and it's just so basic, and there's no information in the first chapter. So um once again, before we move on, your rough draft is your first draft. Your first draft should be roughed, not perfect. Your final draft will be as close to perfect as you can make it, but you'll have 1 to 2 to dozens of drafts before then. So, forms of editing. Don't be scared of editing. Editing can be fun, and editing is some stuff you'll probably do anyways along the way. Here are some examples of that. Pixie says, a shittily written book is something that is written and needs only to be polished, but it no longer needs to be written. Yeah. Yeah, once you've written a story, you got it written. That's a victory. And even if you end up writing more chapters, like, that's still technically a form of editing and writing the story. And editing is still technically a form of writing the story and writing blah, blah, blah. Anyways, some things you'll see in editing, some ideas to help you kind of get a feel of what editing is or what you should focus on, will be proper sentences and paragraphs, the most basic form of editing, to fixing names, places, and events, and plot holes. Like, because what people don't tell you or tell early writers is that once you start writing, there is a high probability of a chance that if you're writing about characters and their what they would do in certain situations, is that they will actually do things that are different than what you have planned, as if they have a mind of their own. And sometimes it's freaky, sometimes it's weird, and sometimes you just have a better idea and write it down that way. Swapping around events, sometimes you just want this event to go before that event. Rewriting whole scenes, sometimes it just didn't hit as strongly as you want it to, or be as emotional as you wanted it to be. Or sometimes this character isn't even in the scene anymore, so you have to rewrite it. Changing names. Sometimes you find out that you have 3 people named the same name, and now it's confusing because the first person is gone, but the last person is not the first person. Removing whole chapters just because like they don't need to be there. It's just pure exposition of nothing that never happens or needed. Same thing with removing characters. Padding chapters, just making them just that little bit longer by adding just a few more words here and there of descriptors. Unaliving, realiving, and re-unaliving characters. Some characters you'll like and then you'll hate, or you'll feel you don't need, or you'll bring back. If you look at Foxtails and Fairy Tales, Lilith was one of these characters that was supposed to be unalived, and then didn't, and then I kept switching forward if I should keep her in the story or not, and ended up keeping her around for now. And for those of you who are worried, I have no plans to unalive her specifically. Other characters, yes. No, I'm just kidding. I'm just trying to scare you. Yeah, Lilith. Lilith is the slave girl, the demonkin girl. She was originally an assassin and was just supposed to die as an assassin, but Sebas ended up not assassinating her or getting assassinated. So, Oh, I remember her. I'm just surprised. Yeah, yeah. She was really just supposed to come in, try to assassinate him, and then get murked, just straight up not alive no more, and then ended up becoming a fixture in the story. So, fixing beats in the story. Uh, was it one of those when the pen wrote it better than you? Yeah, yeah, a little bit. I did go through a lot of like internal agony, and I eventually just kept her around. But she did become a very important and good character to keep around. Fixing beats in the story, um, giving them just that much more satisfying climaxes and conclusions, properly developing characters that didn't have any development in them and just needed it, adding in needed details, especially if you're coming back to stories you want to, when you're editing, you want to add back in those details so it looks like you did it the whole time. I had this planned. Rephrasing conversations just to get them just right, and many other forms. These are just some of the basics that edit. These are some of the basic places that editing can take you. There's nothing super scary about editing. But I have some hot tips for new writers to kind of feel a little bit better and less afraid of it. So, my first hot tip to editing is to just read it aloud to yourself or someone else. If you read it aloud, you will really get to catch all of the sentence and grammar structure things. And then maybe while you're reading it aloud, you realize, man, people would not say this. Or you realize some description is way too long, or you need to get rid of things. But just the first real way to start editing your work will be to start um, just reading it out loud. Just be like, hey, uh, this is this. Da 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 da. Oh, that there's not a period here. Da, 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 da. Oh, this is a run-on sentence because I haven't taken a break and breathed yet. Da, 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 da. Oh, look, this doesn't need to be here, or this person would say this. And so, first tip: read it aloud. Especially if you're reading it aloud to someone else. Remember my tip from last time is that you should really be get over yourself and be open to criticism. Being open to criticism and not taking every like your book isn't the perfect work as a personal slight against you will be one of your greatest assets going forward, because there's some mistakes in editing that you will not recognize because you are too close to the story that someone else reading it will be able to tell you. So it is a very, very valuable tool. So don't uh, cry and run if someone tells you it's not perfect. Listen to them, get their input, and ask them specifically if they're telling you it's terrible. Well, then what should I do to make it better? And if they say nothing, throw it away, then they're just saying it to hurt you, and just ignore them to begin with. But another thing would be to make sure everyone's names, titles, and pronouns are consistent. Are they he, her, them's? Are their names the same way? Do they have the same number of L's and M's in them? Uh, are their last names the same? Are their cities the same? Etc. Just look over the names, get the names straight, just so that the names never change and look weird when they're talking to the same person, but they have a different name. Because you'll know who they're talking to, but the reader probably won't if you get their name wrong. Going back into negative space, look for the negative space and just making sure that the look of what you're going for, the format you're going for, is pleasing and non threatening, unless it has to be. Now, here's the thing: having very little negative space can be a tool you can use. For basic writers, what you want to avoid are big blocks of just text. But once you kind of get an idea of what a block of text means, you can use that to your advantage. One example of this is in Foxtales and Fairy Tales when Sebas goes to another kingdom and gets taught for the first time. One of the ways that he really wins over his teacher is when the teacher doesn't think he's paying attention, he asks just like just word vomit amount of questions to show that he's paying attention, that he wants to learn, that he's there to learn, and just rambles and 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 on in dialogue. But that rambling amount of dialogue shows in the moment to the professor that this is a kid that wants to learn, that this kid, this is what's on the kid's mind, and do I have enough, can I teach him all these things, and it changes their dynamic. So it can be something that you can use to your benefit, but don't use it all the time. Use it as kind of a just like a hidden weapon to just kind of go, ha ha, there's this now. You thought there wasn't going to be block text, but now this is a block text, but now there's a meaning to it. There's a reason it's here, and it sells its point by existing. Pixie says, fun trick with the names I have when I can be asked to do it is to change the color of the text to the person I want to say it. If it doesn't line up, it is easier to spot the mistake. Yeah, changing colors. There's no reason that your document at home shouldn't be color coded if you're gonna if it helps you. Next tip: make sure that there is not more than one chapter of exposition with action in a row. Hey, Dieterbug, good to see you. If you have back-to-back chapters of exposition, you can really bore your readers. So have some action in there, some dialogue, some reason to break up the monotony. And one way to look, just to go back and double check real quick, is just make sure as you're like light skimming and reading over it, is just to make sure that there's not chapters of exposition where nothing's happening. And my last tip, and we're going to go over some of this, is do your best to show and tell in a balance. And that's going to go into our next topic, which is telling versus showing. And this is going to be the basics of it, which will be another feather in your hat for skills you can develop and play with as a writer. A lot of this is going to be almost straight and copy and pasted from my work called How to Write Like a Pirate, Get Viewers, Reads, and etc. But essentially, telling is setting up information, and showing is setting up feelings and emotions to show how cool something is, or how scary something is, or how pretty someone is, etc. So, to tell someone the sky is blue, you would just say the sky is blue. But if there is a purpose to the sky being blue, you will show it. How do you show a sky blue and be able to deliver some like ambiance with it? You would say something like, on the warm summer day, there wasn't a cloud in the sky as the bluebirds called. The soothing cobalt above me eased my worries as I carried my picnic basket to the park. And that sets up an emotion. That sets up that the sky is blue is a good thing. Because the sky is blue could be a bad thing. Maybe there was supposed to be a thunderstorm today. Maybe we haven't had rain in weeks. But in showing the sky is blue and I'm taking a picnic basket to a park, usually there's some connotations for this is a good thing going on there. So, another example of telling that I really want to talk about, because a lot of early writers fall into this trap, is in the first chapter you just want to get some information across, and telling is really good when you just want to get information across. But in this example, John was bullied and has blue hair, his blue eyes and blonde hair. Then he met Jill, and then you get into dialogue of John talking to Jill, it really doesn't set up much for the reader to really empathize with John about. John was just bullied. Was he bullied once? Was he bullied 100 times? Or was he bullied by his parents, by his dog, by the locker, by his book? I'm on the second side of A4 with questions. But yeah, so uh, there's something to say with telling, but if you're going to talk about someone being bullied, you really shouldn't just say they were bullied. You should really give some show of bullying, especially if you want the readers to emphasize with that person who was bullied. So, examples of show. One of my biggest tips for showing is to just use your five senses in the scene as best as you can. Taste is a hard one, but you can if they taste iron or copper in their breath on their tongue. Usually that means they've been beaten up or their mouth is bloody for some reason. But blah 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 blah. So, an example of showing that John was bullied would be this, and this isn't perfectly edited, but I'm gonna read it. uh, John was still sore from the day before. It took some time to wash the blood out of his dirty blonde hair from last night when he was jumped again. With a long sleeve black shirt to cover the bruises on his arms, he wandered the halls of the Somerville High School. His faded blue eyes were sunken as they searched the crowds of students scurrying between classes for his tormentors. He was too distracted by the pain in his wrists to notice the surly redhead who was knocked into him. She was shoved by one of the hot-headed, popular types of girls that he normally stayed away from. John stumbled, but he wasn't quite ready for when the redhead cocked her arm and elbowed him in the nose right before her fist connected with the makeup caked face of the girl who shoved her. Like, you get kind of a clearer idea of John being bullied, and you kind of shown him what the after effects of his bullying are, and then what happens when John meets Jill. Like, this is the setting, and it's an interesting meet cute if they end up falling in love. Um, Now the question is, how do I find the balance between telling versus showing? Now, my biggest advice on this is going to be your priorities. Plus, it shows the redhead is a fighter type. She already has a character type shown. Yeah, exactly. Jill is more than just her name being Jill. Jill is a sassy redhead who's getting into fights. You know, it sets up a lot for her character to show who Jill is in that regard as well. Which may also show how important she is as a character, leading into where you want to show are going to be where your priorities lie. You are going to show and dwell on details that need to be emphasized as important. Anything that's important, you're going to spend time on, and anything that's less important, you're going to cut or limit the time you spend time on. This goes back to Chekhov's gun. Chekhov's gun is this analogy of if there is a gun on the mantle in the first act, it needs to fire in the last act. And you can show how important this gun is when writing, is if you're showing the room and talking about the setting of the game, and you pass over the gun and you say, oh, there's a gun on the mantle, and you move on to talk about and spend 3 chapters or 3 paragraphs on how great the curtains are and how they remind me of my home back home. Maybe the gun isn't as important as the curtains, but if you take the time to be like, and it was a Colt 65 revolver with platinum plating coated in a fine layer of dust, or seemed to have been polished regularly. It had been used in this age at this time, and da 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 da. And I knew the history behind it, and da 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 da. If you really dwell on the gun on the mantelpiece, then you really get a sense that the gun on the mantelpiece is far more important than the curtains. But it all depends on how much time you spend on that. If it's not important, don't spend time on it. That's how you figure out where that balance is. So, We are near the end of this, or basically at the end of this. These are my takeaways for this class. First of all, these are just the basics. You should really get a real feel that these are going to be some basic terms and ideas to get you started on your way, some tools to take you out of the rookie leagues. Nothing says I am writing for the first time and don't know what I'm doing, like your chapter being one paragraph. I have now given you the tool to not be a rookie. Don't do that. um, use these tools. They're important. They're good. They're for you. Now that you're getting a feel for more the technical side of things, you can start to develop your own style and experiment. Um, as I said before in my talking about web novel formatting, my style really became the formatting my own discovery of this formatting web novel format, where I played with novels and spacing and found the limitations of light novel works as they are translated and read freely online, and kind of mixed the two together to for my own style. And much of my style in writing also comes from exposition through dialogue. When characters talk, they talk about events. When characters talk, they show things happening in the world around them. When they talk, it's more than just concepts and ideas being passed around. Sometimes they're speeches, or sometimes they're talking while going to go do something, or they're talking about something that happened in the past that's really important. But a lot of dialogue will happen in my novels because they talk to each other and things will develop from those conversations. And the last takeaway is that you don't have to do any of this alone. There are plenty of people here to help. I have written and recorded and done at least 5 hour-long streams now on a creative writing class, and there's going to be more going forward, because some of these are going to be like resource streams with more specific topics, and especially like this stream in particular was requested and set up because of some comments on my Discord. So if you would like some specific answers to specific questions about writing, come to these classes, or I am active in my Discord. And once again, there are links to my Patreon page in my Twitch profile, and on my Patreon page, you don't have to subscribe to anything to get to my Discord. There's just a link there in the About Me page. Just go do it. I'm very active there. It's probably where I'm most active. I'm only like mildly active in Twitter right now, just because I'm posting my topics and links to my streams. So right now, Twitter is mostly my other extra announcement for my streams, and so maybe some writing prompts. But finally, the last thing I want to talk about you in the lecture type setting is your homework. As always, write more. And you've been writing. There's no reason not to develop your skills and write better and write all the stories. So get pen to paper first, and then you can make it pretty and readable as you go and develop your skills as a writer. Emphasize this one more time just because it needs to be said. Your first draft does not have to be perfect. Just take the first steps, get it done, and go back to edit later. So, question time. Yes, it is question time. So, Pixie apparently has pages and pages and pages of note, or at least a page and a half of notes. So, the first question I have: audiences will pick you. Some audiences just form around you, and while there are trends, sometimes you want to break with them as a writer. At which point do you think you need to break from the wants of the audience to write a story you want to write? That is an excellent question. And here's the thing: your audience should be at least somewhat supportive of you and your endeavors. And if you want to go out and try new things and they are against that, that's probably the time you need to break from your audience. The people that truly care about you and your works are going to follow you, and there's just some people you can't talk to. When it comes to people that are on the internet and judging your success by them, I will always say that first and foremost, you should write for you, and then you should share your works. Now, if you want to share your works effectively, you should write to your audience. But the amount of fun you have writing should be dictated by you and how much you want to write and what you want to write. Does that answer your question? Yes, awesome. How worried a novice writer should be about their paragraphs starting with the same word, especially first person writers and the cursed I. Um, my rule of thumb would be every chapter should not start with the word I. And if you are starting every paragraph with the word I, you should go and read Foxtails and Fairy Tales. Listen to me. This isn't just me plugging my work. Foxtails and Fairy Tales is in first person, and you're going to see a lot of sentences that start with I, but you're also going to see a lot of sentences that are not started with I. This all comes down to reading effectively. Um, you can read and be entertained. There is nothing wrong with reading and being entertained. But to read effectively will be to go to books that you like, or while you're reading them, to pick up tips and tricks to help benefit your writing. Um, so go back to any book you've ever read that you enjoyed that was written in first person, and go look at the sentence structures and look at what tricks and tips they use. You can start sentences with my, or you can start sentences with the foyer was gray, and I think that it was a bad color, instead of starting with, and I think it was a bad color. I would say that you could probably get away with about 3 paragraphs in a row with starting I as the start of the paragraph, but you really shouldn't break more than 5. At 5, there's going to be a pattern, and your reader's going to notice, and you really shouldn't fall into that trap. Now, if you're writing a rough draft and getting the ideas down, just get the ideas down. And while you're getting the ideas down, and you notice this is happening, while you're getting the ideas down, experiment, because there's no better place to experiment than in a rough draft. But don't stress out so much about it that you stop writing, or you spend hours and hours writing the same paragraph, and you just can't get on to the next one. So don't stress yourself out about it that it kills you, and that your rough draft should be focused on getting words on page. But in the editing phase, you should really go back and fix that. So that's my answer. Does that answer your question? Awesome. Now, long one. This is about a hook. With longer novels and shorter novels, is it fine to have a hook a bit later? Think Lord of the Rings, let's say 3 chapters. Considering the back of the book already has a description of the book, shouldn't that serve as the hook? So much so. Yes and no. As a new author, you shouldn't be bogged down by a hook too much. A hook you should really worry about more when you're trying to sell your novel to a larger audience. A hook is going to play into knowing your audience, and all a hook is something to grab the reader's attention. And most readers will go in and read the bio or read the preface and then start with the first chapter and then decide if they want to keep writing or not. That's why the hook is important. Do you need a hook? Well, that's debatable and a discussion among just fields of writers. I would say as a beginning writer, you don't super need to worry about it. As a writer who wants to get their book published by a big publisher, that's when you would really want to start nailing down having a good hook in the first chapter. Tolkien is kind of the exception to the law in a lot of rules, but also sets a lot of rules. So right now, Tolkien is in a place where people are going to read Lord of the Rings not because it's some book on a shelf, but because they've heard about it because it's part of dogmatic culture. But if you're just a new writer um, in a in a puddle and no name that doesn't have their name out there like J.R. Tolkien, you are at one point going to want to focus on using your first chapter to fish in new readers. Does that answer your question? Yeah. All right. In much the same vein, is it possible to have a hook in the prologue and then allow the slower start in the chapters? In much the same sense, a prologue is better serves longer and slower stories rather than quick and fast-paced ones. Yeah. So essentially, if you have a prologue, there are people that will skip it. I only say that because I'm one of those people that skips the prologue for the first chapter. But most people will look at the prologue and look at the first as the first chapter, and will want to get that hook out of the first sentence. Essentially, it's just the first thing you say that's going to grab your reader's attention. And if you if you can't get the reader's attention in the first chapter, they will not keep reading the story. Is kind of the emphasis on why a hook is important. Do you need a hook? Well, technically, the answer is no. If you want people to read your story, just random strangers to read your story, then you'll probably want a hook. If you're just selling a story to people that you like or you're reading it for an occasion, you probably don't need a hook. Um, but if you want to grab the attention of a more general audience of strangers, then you're going to want a hook somewhere. And the hook is just that first sentence that they read that brings their attention and makes them want to read more. So you can sell the premise of your book later on, and you're going to want to sell it later on, but you're going to want to use at least one. You're going to want to sell yourself at some point in your first chapter if you want random strangers to read it, and the hook is going to be your go-to place to develop that. While you're answering, I am typing up the next question. Sorry. So presume it does answer the next question. Why do you skip the prologue? Well, if you the reason I skip the prologue will be because as great as some prologues are, I am such a story character based reader and writer. Some prologues don't have the main character in the first chapter. Like Dan Brown's Angels and Demons, it's a dead guy. And it was so confusing to me, and so like it was a good teaser and everything, but it reading it in my young age when I read it and being so confused about what was going on, I skip to the first chapter and do so as kind of a habit now, because I want to learn about the main character. I want to go on the main character's adventure, maybe not necessarily the story's adventure, and so that's why I have a tendency to skip the prologue with certain books. Um, that's me though. That's my personal quirk. So, so it's why I would advise having a hook in the first chapter. And it's very simple. A hook is just to get the reader's attention, get them interested, which you want to do the rest of the story. But the hook is going to be the very first sentence is going to be the best place to do that, which is why it's called the hook. With the pace, is it, and this is mostly for new writers, is it wrong to change the pace of the story throughout the story? I would say that if you are keeping the same pace throughout the story, um, that for some people is good, and if you change it, it is also good. It all depends on the story that you want to tell. But at a certain point, you can tell when pacing is good or when pacing is bad. But if you have an adventure novel, and you want to tell about an adventure, your pacing is going to be set in kind of a different way than if you go like straight action. In straight action novels, just in the most sterile of sentences, in the most sterile, most basic in ideas, you're going to have action scene, or you're going to have build up, action scene, build up to next action scene, build up to next action scene, build up to final action scene, climax, catharsis, and ending. That's the most sterile way to write an action novel or action book or action story. But if you were to write like a isekai, um, just kind of a slice of life adventure, then your pace is going to be set by a set of different standards. Your first scene may be an action scene because they get stuck in the middle of the woods and they have to fight for themselves. That may be your hook or something. And then your next event in the story won't be an action scene. It will be discovering the world. It'll be meeting the first heroine. It'll be going to the Adventurers Guild, going through going to their first dungeon, saving their first heroine, going on their first crazy adventure, and so on and so forth. So not every event in the story is going to be an adventure, and it's good if you have those different types of events to change up the pace of the story. Spend a little bit longer in the dungeon if it's a story about dungeons, and then set little events that are meeting new people and going shopping. You're going to want to be those to be shorter. Uh, but if it's character based, you're going to spend a lot of time on characters. If it's world based, you're going to spend a lot of time with these events showing off the world. If it's uh, romance or ecchi based, you're going to spend a lot of time exploring different relationship ideas and events going on between characters, how they develop their feelings, how they show those feelings, that kind of thing. So you are going to want to set a pace for regular events happening, and it's okay to make that slower and faster. But at a certain point, if it's an adventuring novel and they spend the first chapter with this high octane thing, and the next chapter saving the main hero for the slave market, and then 42 chapters farming and uh, looking at the trees, you've broken your pace and you should not do that. There should be, if you've set up some kind of pace, you should get back to that pace. Unless you want to set up a slice of life with some action segments, in which case you probably should have some little action segments in there. In the same vein, is it a good rule of thumb to have faster pace for increased stakes and have slower pace when the stakes are lowered? Yeah. At a certain point, if you're gonna raise the stakes, you're gonna want to hit that payoff before the reader gets fatigued. Um, and if you're going to have huge stakes as the overall story, you're going to want to raise those stakes slower and slower, but also like raise those stakes. If the end of your novel is going to be a final showdown with the royal family or with some event, you're going to use the whole story to raise those specific stakes. But in order to ease reader fatigue, you will set lower stakes in the middle of like winning card games or um, subverting a criminal ring that's under the royal family, that still pays to the idea that there's going to be a big final showdown with the royal family, but you've dealt a vital blow to that, so that kind of eases the tension because you get kind of a mini catharsis in that over ending battle. But if you have like a lower stakes adventure story, where it's going to high school and cooking and having little romance encounters, you'll probably want to keep the stakes low. Like, what if she doesn't like my shirt I'm wearing? And then in that case, you will play up the drama to raise and lower stakes depending on um, what you want to show to the readers. But if you're gonna have a story with overall lower stakes, it's much safer to have a slower pace. But if you're gonna have a fast paced work, you're really gonna want to hit those strides and understand that the reader is gonna pick it up and put it down, pick it up and put it down. Solo leveling is a good book to look at story wise when looking at raising and lowering stakes and ideas. And I'm only bringing it up because I just read the newest chapter. But throughout the story, eventually, like the first chapters are the stakes are high because their life on the line, and they never quite lose that. But then you start to see that the stakes start to get higher when the sister is now being attacked by monsters, and when the world is under siege, and when the love interest is under siege. Like, you kind of, they raise the stakes in kind of different ways, but the stakes are raised, and essentially you get a feel for why the main character is doing what they're doing because of these super high stakes. At the very beginning of the story, he's just trying to make a living, and then by the end of the story, the stakes are so high, and he's so like in his position that he ends up having to save the world in some critical fashion, where he has to make like a big sacrifice. So if you look at the pacing and leveling, you'll see in that lots of little stakes where he goes into dungeons and things, but the overall big stakes do get raised in individual arcs along the way until it starts with the story about just trying to make money to the story about saving the world, which I would argue that a lot of adventure stories eventually turn into. Reach the limit on this next one, so bear with it. Please, anyone else with questions in the meantime? We'll wait. Give me a chance to get a drink of water. Dieterbug says, not really related with pacing, but, and we don't need to talk about only pacing, but is using Chat GPT as a helper cheating? Had my mind on that for a bit. I would say no. I would say that if you wrote an entire novel and tried to sell it as your own work using GPT, that would be that would be plagiarizing a little bit. Just because it was Chat that wrote it, and honestly, it probably wouldn't be very good. So I don't know why you'd want to sell it that way. But if you're using it to generate stories and or generate ideas for yourself, that's fine. I use word generators all the time to generate ideas. I look at random pictures on the internet to generate ideas. Whatever you gotta do to generate ideas and get by. Um, if you're using Chat GPT to figure out how to write certain segments and then you like tweak them just a little bit, like there's no problem with that in my opinion. I'm sure other people have different opinions on that, but if you can polish it enough and make it yours, it's you've polished it and made it yours. I use it when I can't find words for a scene I already have in mind. Yeah. I would say use your resources. That would be my opinion on it. Um, Obviously, it comes down to like imitation versus plagiarism. Imitating something is okay when you're starting out, but you shouldn't plagiarize someone else's work word for word and call it your own. That's bad. But if you write a story that has similar ideas to another concept, but you're making it yours, that's fine. That's imitation, and you're going to imitate until you find your own style. Anyways, there's just no getting around to it. All right. Pixie's long question. Is it really bad to have a common gimmick? This is in response to the dead parent question. Now, aside from the question of how kids would ever end up in an adventure with living parents to tell them off for not calling the cops instead of hunting down murderers themselves, dead parent commonness does serve a purpose of you not having so much to explain. There are some genre and story beats that are common enough that there is no need to explain to the audience that is familiar with those books. Goblins for fantasy books, audience, for example. So, is it an issue for common gimmicks if used well and smartly enough? Sorry for the long question, but I needed to play with the devil's advocate for this question. I would say for dead parents, it's a common trope for a reason. For every reason you've already mentioned and several more, it just complicates things a lot less when the parents are dead. You don't have to worry about them, or don't even mention them unless in passing. Um, but I would not say that dead parents are a gimmick. I would say that the relationship that you have with those dead parents could be the gimmick. But if you're just like, John was bullied and has dead parents, oh, and then he met Jill, that's not a gimmick. That's a setting. That's background information. Um, the gimmick would be that John is super timid, and this very aggressive tomboy girl, Jill, is falling in love with him, but he's too worried about being bullied to really show that affection. Another comic gimmick, but it plays into the story. And then what's unique about John? What's unique about Jill? What's their relationship? What's that base pound? Like that would be the gimmick. Like what you have to think about with gimmicks is like what you're bringing to the story that makes it different than how everyone else has used it. So if you're going to include dead parents, everyone has. How are you going to use it to make it interesting? Is how I would rephrase that. Um, Dead parents abound in fantasy novels, especially isekai ones, but that doesn't mean that um, it can be your gimmick. Your gimmick will probably center around the main character and how they interact or use the world and things about them. A very easy, cheap way to sell a gimmick is what is their cheat power in another world, or what is their unique talent they aren't sharing, and why are they hiding it, or uh, what makes this world different from modern worlds. And sometimes that gimmick is that there's this VR game that does things this way, or sometimes it's um, my talent is in cooking, and so the entire gimmick of the story is that it's centered around developing as a chef. So I would say if you're going to create a story and make dead parents your gimmick, then from start to finish, your entire story should center around the dead parents, how they get over loss, how they overcome grief, how the parents died, how they were when they were alive, their background story. If dead parents is going to be your gimmick, you should lean into it. And the gimmick is going to be something you're going to lean into, so that's what I would say. Um, another example that I would use would be this new anime coming out called I Will Save 8,000 Gold in Another World. She has dead parents and a dead brother, but one of the gimmicks that they use for the show itself is that one way that she logics herself back on track and helps motivate herself is how weird and awkward her brother is, and has these conversations with the spirit of her dead brother in her memories, and that helps profoundly move her forward, which would be a gimmick on that subtype of genre. Instead of like the parents are ushering her forward, it's the brother that's also dead, but he was the one who was the nerd and probably should have been isekai'd, but she was instead, and he just straight up died. But her spirit and his memory are there to help guide her. Does that answer your question? Yes, awesome. Is it better to tell than show when it comes to his name gun? To Chekhov's gun. Don't know how to spell his name, but when it comes to, but in cases where in showing there's a risk of the audience missing something important, is it better to tell rather than show? Um, for new readers, I for sorry for no for new writers, I would say the rule of thumb is to show what's important and tell things that help you get to showing things that are important. If you're going to mess around with the formula, that is more of an advanced trick, which is very, very something that you can do. Very, it's done in the past. If you're like in a mystery novel, you can tell someone that there's a gun on the counter, and tell someone that there is a or you can tell someone there's a Chekhov's gun on the mantle, and you can tell someone about the blinds, but then you're going to show how important it is that we have this conversation with this character. Um, but then later, that gun gets more important in other scenes. That would be another way to tell and show. But if something is important, you should dwell on it, is my advice. Um, I would say you can hide things in plain sight and just kind of leave them for other things and call it a day later. But yeah, rule of thumb on show versus tell: show things that are important and tell about things that need to be told. Thanks, Cap. Sorry for the many questions, but I wanted to ask some questions I would have asked 6 years ago and hopefully helped others. Great job on this one. It was informative. Awesome. Do you have any more questions, or does anyone else have any more questions? We will open the floor. Yeah. Okay. Mostly about future topics, but I feel that is a Discord question. Yeah, for future topics, I definitely want to make uh, I want to go into basing them off of Discord questions and Discord ideas. Usually, I wait till like the day before until I decide to make one or what topic it's going to be on. Um, as we go on, I will start nailing down more specific things. So I'll probably have one about characters and how to make a good character versus a bad character. I'll probably do one on how to get over writer's block. I'll do some on uh, just resources that I have available as a writer in the isekai genre, as a fantasy writer. So I'll do entire topics. I want to do an entire uh, resource stream on dungeons, specifically different kinds of dungeons and what they mean, and common tropes and how to build one if you're doing a fantasy setting. Maybe one on adventurers guilds and that kind of thing. I think I want to do one on how to build kingdoms. I think that would be a great world building specific one. The list of top to bottom, king, queen, duke, marquis, count, baron, earl, all those. I know that wasn't right order. Earl's above count, I believe. And then as well as other uh, like the czar and empires and what sets a kingdom different from an empire. Um, how to write fight scenes, things like that. But I will do all of those when the opportunity and inspiration strikes to make it really good. But for now, we're covering the basics, and this one was really heavily inspired by Discord questions. And Spiro in the Discord chat specifically requested I do one on formatting and pacing, so that's where most of this came from, as well as some little information to polish it up. I have a couple topics on my mind, some of which I want to pick your brains about or hear your opinion of. Mostly the hot take, having written for a while for now level topics. I also like the kingdom idea. I have some ideas on that one. Yeah, so for the most part, watch my Discord if you're not a fan of Discord or can't get in for whatever reason. I do post on Twitter about my Twitch streams just to kind of give uh, my followers one more aspect to follow me on, one more uh, way to get information on what I'm talking about. I do have an Instagram, but I watch more memes on Instagram than I post on Instagram. Um, I'm very active on Discord. Patreon is where I put all of my early chapters, and Wattpad is where I post all of my novels. You can go and find me on Wattpad at Nathaniel Wilhelm, and you can find all of my works that I've talked about and some more we haven't talked about. Otherwise, I'm doing this as a I'm streaming because I like streaming. I've always wanted to kind of get into this base and get into this crowd. Um, Talking about writing is my unique gimmick that I want to bring to streaming. But otherwise, I play Dead Cells. I play Pokemon Sword. I'll play more as I go on. I might play Harry Potter. I don't know yet. I'm gonna wait for kind of the anti-mob to die down to see where things are. Um, but for now, I'm just kind of stream what I know and what I have, and do funny voices and have fun at the same time. So even if there are streams where nobody shows up because I'm sad and alone at post at really unpopular times, because I work the night shift, I still have fun and still get to do it. It's a work of passion, and I'm not here to win anyone's approval. I'm here to have fun and give my followers one more way to interact with me and one more way to enjoy content that I make. And it gives me one more avenue to make content, which I'm having fun doing. So, if there are no more questions, we will end this stream. So, as always, I love you. You guys are awesome, amazing. You're handsome and pretty. You can do it. Writing is a skill. You'll get better just by doing it, just like you would exercising any muscle. But as always, may the winds of fortune ever fill your sails. And Pixie, come to whichever ones that you want to come to. It'll be awesome to have you here. It's always awesome to interact with readers. But have a great day, everyone, or a great night, whatever time of day you're watching that.